አሜሪካን ኤምባሲ የኢትዮ አሜሪካ መልካም ግንኙነት የጀመሩበት የስራ ዘመን 120ኛ ዓመታቸው ምክንያት ማድረግ ጋዜጣዊ መግለጫ ሰጥቷል። ይህ ጋዜጣዊ መግለጫ አምባሳደር ኤርቪን ማሲንጋ፣ ፕሮፌሰር ገቢሳ እጀታና ሌሎች ትላልቅ ምሁራንና ከፍተኛ የመንግስት ኃላፊዎችን በተገኙበት በአዲስ አበባ ዩኒቨርሲቲ ነው የተካሄደው። እንግዲህ በዚህ መግለጫ ላይ ተገኝቶ አምባሳደር ኤርቪን ማሲንጋ በዚህ የ120ኛ የኢትዮ አሜሪካ መልካም ግንኙነት ጉዞ ሂደት ላይ እጅግ በጣም በርካታ የሚባሉ ውጤታማ የሆኑ ስራዎችን እየተሰሩበት እንደሆነ በመጥቀስ በተለይ ደግሞ በትምህርቱ ዘርፍ ላይ በኢኮኖሚ በማህበራዊ ትስስሮች በተለይ ደግሞ የሁለቱም ሀገራት የራሳቸው የሆነ ባህልና ትውፊት እሴቶችን እንዳለ ሆኖ ያንን መሰረት ባደረገና ያንን ነገር ሳይለቅ የሁለቱንም መልካም ግንኙነት ወደ ተሻለ ደረጃ ላይ ሊያደርሱ የሚችሉት እጅግ በጣም በርካታ ጥሩ ነገሮችን የተከናወነበት የመልካም ግንኙነት ዘመን እንደነበረ ገልጿል ማለት ነው።
Since its founding in 1949, the US government's Point 4 program and its successor, USAID, have changed the lives of billions of people, literally billions of people around the world, and here in Ethiopia. And it's a special privilege of mine to celebrate the impact of the Point 4 program has had here in Ethiopia through the experiences of one of the most distinguished minds in agricultural development today, Professor Gebisa Ejeta. In his 1949 inaugural address, President Truman, a long time ago, said in the fourth point of his speech that the United States would embark on a bold new program for making the benefits of American scientific advances and industrial progress available for the improvement and growth of less developed parts of the world. That program was officially the Technical Cooperation Administration and was known around the world as the Point 4 program. Of course, we had to change the name. In the wake of World War II, half the world's population was chronically hungry, and almost as many were illiterate. In 1950, life expectancy in developing nations averaged 41 years. When the first Point 4 project was launched in Iran, in 1950, half of all babies there died before their first birthday. These are sobering statistics that remind us not to lose sight of the tremendous arc of human development that has taken place in the past 75 years. With radical improvements in life expectancy, health, education, economic development, and that is unprecedented in human history. The wars, strife, environmental crises, and continuing desperation of some of those very close to us in this country and in this region and this hemisphere, distract us from the profound improvements in the overall human condition that we have witnessed since the end of World War II. The story that we're here to celebrate today is in many ways one in which Americans from Oklahoma State University and from around our country, working with equally committed Ethiopians, have built institutions that trained and empowered this nation's brilliant young minds to contribute to this arc of development here in Ethiopia and around the world. Professor Gebisa's story, and the stories of other Point 4 alumni who we are thrilled to be able to have with us today, illustrates so clearly the intended purpose of the American experiment in development. Starting from a humble village upbringing, as we heard earlier today, Professor Gebisa's gained entrance into the educational opportunities established under the Point 4 program to recognize and train Ethiopia's best minds. Professor Gebisa's path started at Jima Agricultural and Technical School and then Alamaya College of Agriculture, and finally took him to undergraduate studies in the United States. These educational opportunities laid the foundation for Dr. Gebisa's groundbreaking achievements as a plant scientist, which have had a profound impact, as we heard earlier today, on agricultural sustainability and global food security. In recognition of these contributions, President Biden presented Dr. Gebisa with the 2023 U.S. National Medal of Science, our nation's most coveted award in science. Professor Gebisa, allow me to say how proud we are at the United States Embassy to have this opportunity to host you here in Ethiopia this week. so that we can, together with our Ethiopian brothers and sisters, celebrate this remarkable recognition of your contributions to improving the lives of millions of people here in Ethiopia, around the continent, and across the world. Dr. Gabisa's story is extraordinary, but it is not unique. Thousands of other young men and women in this country have had their lives transformed by the educational opportunities provided to them through educational institutions established under the Point 4 program. Those institutions, as we've heard before, have evolved in some of the nation's leading research institutions, institutions which contribute to global research and development. Harmaya University, Jimma University, and the University of Gondar, as well as other universities, institutes, and programs around this country. From dozens of intrepid faculty from Oklahoma State University who came to Ethiopia to help establish those institutions, to their current presidents, some of whom are here today, leaders and faculty, it is clear to see the essential role that dedicated educators play in advancing the human condition here in Ethiopia and around the world. We are so proud to see from these seeds planted by the Point 4 program have grown into an enduring relationship between the United States and Ethiopian universities. Not only does Oklahoma State continue to contribute to educational development in Ethiopia 75 years later, but dozens of other United States universities have active research and educational partnerships here, large and small, to a degree that is unusual in Africa or anywhere in the world. That is why I'm so proud of the work of our embassy has been doing in close cooperation and partnership with the Ministry of Education and Ethiopia's public universities, as well as with U.S. universities to help Ethiopia's public universities excuse me, transition to a new model of independent governance that will set the foundation for the next phase of Ethiopia's educational development. 75 years after the launch of the Point 4 program, the United States continues to stand by Ethiopia to pursue our shared goals of strengthening higher education so as to enhance academic freedom, ensure equitable access to quality higher education, build democratic institutions and their governance, transparency and accountability, and bolster joint international research. I'm pleased to announce today that the United States government will continue to support these efforts of the Ministry of Education and Ethiopia's leading research universities to make this transition to autonomy through a new grant of more than $500,000 with the Ethiopian Academy of Science. This funding will help Ethiopia's leading universities develop the governance structures and practices necessary to operate as more independent institutions that create educational opportunities that allow this nation's best minds to achieve their greatest potential as this century goes forward. Following the proud tradition of the Point 4 program, this grant also allows us to continue to strengthen the partnerships between U.S. and Ethiopian universities. In recent years, many top U.S. universities, particularly from our so-called land grant universities, Oklahoma State, Texas Tech, the Ohio State, University of Indiana, and others have worked with their Ethiopian counterparts to strengthen their educational leadership, management, and governance. U.S. land-grant universities offer valuable models of excellence in education and research and devotion to their public mission of empowering America's youth and improving the development of our nation and around the world. From the Point 4 program in the 1950s to USAID's long support of basic and higher education to our current collaboration on educational leadership, management, and governance, improving the lives of Ethiopians and contributing to the development of Ethiopia through education has been a hallmark of the 120 years of U.S.-Ethiopia bilateral relations. In the spirit of the Point 4 program and the 120th anniversary of U.S.-Ethiopian relations, allow me to assure you that the U.S. government and U.S. universities are your closest allies in this critical moment in Ethiopia's higher education system. Thank you all for joining us here today for this unique opportunity to celebrate the enduring legacy of the Point 4 program here in Ethiopia, as exemplified through the life and works of Dr. Gabisa and the other alumni of the Point 4 program. Thank you very much.
ከዚህ በተጨማሪም ፕሮፌሰር ገቢሳ እጀታ በዚህ አስመልክቶ ያዘጋጁትን ጥናታዊ ጽሑፍ በሚያቀርቡበት ሰዓት ላይ በተለይ ወደ ኋላ መለስ ብሎ ይህንን ግንኙነት ከጀመሩበት ሁለቱም ሀገራት ላይ እጅግ በጣም በርካታ መልካም ነገሮችን እየተሰሩበት በትምህርቱ ዘርፍ ላይ በበጎ ፈቃዱ ዘርፍ ላይ በፖለቲካል ዘርፍና በአግሪካልቸር ወይም ደግሞ በግብርናው ዘርፍ ላይም እጅግ በጣም ውጤታማ የሆኑ ልውውጦችንም እንደተደረጉበት እና በእነዚህ ዘርፎች ላይ የሁለቱም ሀገራት ወደ ተሻለ ደረጃ እንዲያድግ ግንኙነታቸው መግለጽ የቻሉት
14-year-old got the opportunity to go study at Jimma Agricultural and Technical School, favorably called JATS. That was where my foundation started. Imagine a kid from rural Ethiopia. And I dramatized my story by saying, the day before, I was living in my mother's hut on the floor, on a mat on the floor. The next day, I was at Jimma, sleeping on a bed, a clean white sheet and a blanket. That is a transformative experience. What is even more dramatic is once I got there, the values we learned, the educational process. Imagine this is a vocational technical high school, and not a formal academic school. But the values that we got and the education we got, we're extremely proud of, and as it turned out, it was the best education anyone can get. And so that I feel very, very strongly, very favorably acknowledge the contribution of Jimma Agricultural High School. And then we went to Alamar. The story was the same. And so for several years, every year in Jimma, 50 students from rural communities would come to attend. They would be split into two groups, 9A, 9B, 10A, 10B, 11A, 11B, 12A, 12B. 200 people. That was how big the high school was, a small high school. When we got to Alamar, it was not that much more, 400 students. So these are people that you would know by name, every one of them, the character, what moves them. So you learn from each other. That's the tradition that built us, that made us who we became. And so I came here representing no one other than myself. I'm not standing here on behalf of the United States government. I'm not standing here on behalf of Purdue University. I came here individually, on my own, very proud and very happy to have this opportunity to go through and share my story, the story of the Point 4 program, the impact it has had in the economy and the development of this great country. Thank you. As the ambassador indicated, the story of the Point 4 program starts with President Truman, who was coming from, at the time, at the end of the Second World War, and a lot of that was in his mind. And so, in his inaugural address in 1949, I would warmly invite you, please, just for the record, please Google it up and read the story at the inaugural address of President Truman. The statements that were made, and tells you very clearly what he was coming from and what he wanted to impart in offering this. War was in his mind, and so he said he's going to have this program of peace and freedom, 4 major courses of action. The first action he said was, again coming from the war, he knew the value of the United Nations. And he said, we will continue to give unfaltering support for the United Nations and related agencies. Point number 2, we will continue our program of world economy and recovery, and that is, he was thinking about the Europeans and the European Marshall Plan that about a year earlier that he committed himself to make. The third was, we will strengthen freedom-loving nations against the dangers of aggression and security of the North Atlantic area, and that's what has become today. And then on the number 4, he wanted to be very specific. We must embark on this bold new program for making the benefits or scientific advances and industrial program available for improvement of growth and of less developed areas of the world. What he meant by that, and he would describe in the inaugural address, you will see that he said, America is beginning to be a major economic nation, and we've advanced our science, we're making progress industrially, we would like to share that with poor developing countries, because when they do grow, when they do grow their economies, when they get themselves better, they're going to be partnered with us, not on the fight for freedom as well as for economy. And so this, as I said the other day, was an enlightened self-interest. And so American foreign policy that I've gotten to appreciate over time, governments come and go, but the philosophy and the basic rationale behind the way they operate with the individual countries is based on that aligned self-interest. We will help you, we'll assist you, but we also want to be partner with you. And I would like to say that the partnership with Ethiopia that endured for decades is based on that philosophy that we would like to acknowledge at this time. I wanted to, again, maybe chronologically indicate that his declaration was made in 1949. It's not projecting on the slide? Okay. Can we project it? No, it's not only slide. Are you projecting on that?
Yes. Hello, everyone. I'm Dr. Casey Trump, president of Oklahoma State University. We're good luck.
The inaugural address was made in 1949. In January, a year earlier, in June 1949, Truman asked legislation to appropriate 6 months later a $45 million allotment. That was what was paying for these institutions that would get the Point 4 program. Selected countries got this opportunity. Highly selected countries. And so, of those, I've had first-hand experience with a couple of them. One is the life I lived with Harama and Jimma, and then Brazil, University of Viçosa, that was established by the Point 4 program. And Purdue University was the university that helped University of Viçosa. I happened to study the history of those institutions, and I would like to tell you, when I was invited to go and speak at the University of Viçosa, I asked if they would dig up in their history and tell me how much money was spent. It was about $11 million over the 15 years. And I came back to Purdue and asked our international programs, could you look at it, how much was spent? So it's exactly $11 million. And I asked an economist at that time to translate what that would mean in 2001 when I received the World Food Prize. At that time, and it was about $60 million. And I would imagine it would not be more than 80 or 100 million. That's a small amount of money, but the legacy and the impact of that program was heavy. And then in 1950, Point 4 passes the Art of International Development. As the ambassador said, from 1949 to 1961, the program that ran the technical assistance program for the United States was the Point 4 program, until President Kennedy in 1961 created the U.S. Agency for International Development. Again, let me pause and say that it's the story of the Point 4 program that I'm going to share here, but I wanted to divert a little bit, and at this time speak about the land-grant university model in the United States. The motivation that President Truman had was built on his experience of what land-grant university had done for the state of Missouri and for several states in the United States. That is, in 1862, President Lincoln created legislated the Morrill Act. The Morrill Act that gave every state that was interested to apply a land possession of 33,000 acres from the western part of the country so that they could sell timber from that and commit to establishing a land-grant university model, the land-grant university colleges of agriculture and the mechanical arts. And the reason was at the time, even though there were universities in the eastern part of the country where the colonial settlers were, agrarian society, most of America was agrarian. The Industrial Revolution was creating a new middle class, but agriculture has had some concerns. Soils in the east were worn out because of the population increase. Migration of people was to the new states in the west. There were plenty of crop failures in 1838, created food scarce. That continued to be even in the 1913 during the Depression. And then famine in parts of Europe in 1840. All of these were alarming, and therefore they thought maybe committing the nation into land-grant universities that would serve the communities was what was in his mind when he created them. I just also wanted to share with you what 19th century political and social background in the United at the time was. There was emergence of science in Europe and unhappiness with higher education institutions because these were elitist liberal arts universities that were in the East. And so the philosophy there and the curriculum was not one that would benefit rural agrarian communities. There was unrest in agricultural circles. Councils and institutions were formed across the country to enhance the economic development in rural communities. And then the desire for education was growing. As I indicated, agricultural productivity was lagging behind Europe, and so these were an alarming time. Engineers were needed to build roads, bridges, and operate factories. And so they thought maybe if a more appropriate education could be created for America, and that was this creating colleges of agriculture and the mechanical arts. Mechanical arts at that time, in those lingo at the time, was engineering schools that would build equipment and tools. By mid-century, the groundwork had been laid out for the land-grant university system. Public demands for a new system was very strong. Agricultural interest in a new institutional systems were growing. Land grants as a mechanism for funding public needs had been used successfully, needed for a few visionaries to make it happen. And so 1862 was where President Lincoln, as I indicated, created the land-grant university model. I tell this story because it's interesting. Things never happen as fast as they do today and always take time. And so a young congressman from Vermont, Justin Morrill, proposed the land-grant idea to find the resources to build these colleges and universities. By 1859, he continued to fight. He got it passed by both House and Senate, but the President Buchanan at that time vetoed it and it failed. So until 1862, when President Lincoln took over, and somehow Morrill persisted, and therefore eventually was also named after Mr. Morton at that time had become a senator, so he had a little more clout, and this was named after him. So the People's University was a reality in 1862, but they have had a long way to go. So what happened was, and then they started asking, what's a land-grant university? Who does it represent? By then, historically, black institutions were not created, and therefore black colleges and universities were not legislated at the time. So in 1890, there was another act, the Morrill Act of 1890, and so those schools today are called the 1890 schools. And then Tribal Colleges Act was not legislated until 1994, more recently. completing that promise and commitment to the country. And yet, there were a lot of problems, just like people like Dr. Samuel will understand, funding shortages, state, and then the state roles and private roles needed to be defined. And so they needed to think about what would the state role would be. Well, again, as I would indicate maybe in the next couple of sentences, one thing that I'd like to share with you what I learned was how democratic a process was the land-grant university model. Because once it passed the legislation, it involves the federal government, it involves the states. There was funding available, made available by federal grant. The state also made funds available. So the states also committed themselves to building institutions to their county, each one of the counties. So the counties are funded, state government knew, federal governments were also involved. Then there were also, the same situation in Ethiopia, and I think maybe the older generation would know this even better, that at that time, the interest to come and study in colleges of agriculture was not as hot as it was later on, and so even in the United States. So a shortage of qualified students, internal bickering over the mission, whether the mission is serving the people or not, lack of perceived value to farmers. And so making sure that this can be bought in, that the community would buy into the concept, it took a lot of doing to process that. So that began to bring new legislation. In 1887, the Hatch Fund to establish experiment stations throughout the country was established. So every state had federal funds to establish experiment stations, to also fund the research through this federal funding. Creative agricultural experiment stations could now address concerns of farmers, created very strong political advocates. That's what I mean about the democratic process. Trigger friction of the two levels. Initially, again, the reality that today's Ethiopian universities face. Within colleges of agriculture, teaching versus research, how do you allocate time? Within universities, whether it is you want a broad education or a narrow education. I remember when I was a senior at Alamaya, I was president of the Plant Science Club. I remember holding a seminar, inviting faculty to hold a seminar with us, whether or not we were being trained the way we should. Are we getting enough hands-on experience to serve the communities and so on?
ከዚህ በተጨማሪም በዚህ የጋዜጣዊ መግለጫ ላይ የተገኙት የተለያዩ ትላልቅ ምሁሮች በዚህ አስመልክቶ የተለያዩ ጥናታዊ ጽሁፎቻቸው በማቅረብና የተለያዩ ከፍተኛ የመንግስት ኃላፊዎችን በዚህ ርዕሰ ጉዳይ ላይ የተለያዩ ሐሳቦችን በማንሸራሸር እና በመወያየት የ120ኛ ዓመታቸውን እጅግ በጣም ውጤታማና የተሻለ ግንኙነት እንዲኖራቸው ሁለቱም ሀገራት ማለት ነው ያደረገ ዘመን እንደነበረ በመጥቀስ በተለይ አምባሳደር ኤርቪን ማሲንጋ ደግሞ ከዚህ በመቀጠል ደግሞ ሁለቱም ሀገራት ወደ ተሻለ የግንኙነት ደረጃ ማደግ የሚችልባቸው እጅግ በጣም ዘርፈ ብዙና በርካታ ስራዎችንም ስራት ዝግጁ እንደሆነ በመግለጽ በዚህኛው ላይ የመላው ለኢትዮጵያ ህዝቦችንም ይህንን መልካም ግንኙነት ለመፈጠሩ የራሳቸው ትልቅ የሆነ አስተዋጽኦ አድርገዋልና እጅግ በጣም ላቅ ያለ ምስጋና አለኝ በማለት ነው መልእክታቸውም ያስተላለፉት። እንግዲህ ውድ ተመልካቾቻችን አሜሪካን ኤምባሲ በ120ኛ የኢትዮ አሜሪካ የመልካም ግንኙነት የስራ ዘመን ጉዞ አስመልክቶ ያዘጋጀውን የመግለጫ ቆይታ ይህንን ይመስል ነበር። አብራችን ስለቆያችሁ እጅግ በጣም እናመሰግናለን። መልካም ጊዜ ሆነላችሁ።